Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Sisters Corner. Just before the break, I was talking with my esteemed guest, Samaya, from Muslim Council of Britain about the horrible, hateful letter that's been going around, which is a call to action by some unknown group or person inviting horrible actions towards Muslims. Many of you will have seen it. And basically, in summary, what we were saying is by sharing it constantly, we're also advertising it for them. And just before we broke, I was saying one of the things that I have that really bugs me is I think people will be sat there, whoever's done this, whichever horrible, nasty person has done this, will be sat there thinking, oh great, you know, everyone's advertising it for me. So I think we need to stop that in its track.
Yes.
As a minimum. But actually it clearly is an indication of the level of hatred and mistrust perhaps that is out there towards Muslim at the moment, which leads into that wider debate around sort of Islamophobia.
Yeah.
So what do you think? What's our challenges here, Samaya?
Yeah, I mean, we really share those concerns that the more that people share the date in particular, the more widespread it will be, and it'll give it undue prominence. We don't want it to be more popular than it should be, which is not popular at all. And I think that's it's very common to kind of want to respond and share, but I think in this respect it can be quite dangerous. But I think in terms of wider challenges, it's broad and it's societal and it's structural and it's all of these things that are very, very difficult to change just with like sentiment and goodwill. We can expect or you can see the way in which people have started to like condemn and start to speak out against it, and I think that's amazing that people feel that they want to do that. But I think where energy is best served at this particular point in time is trying to kind of move us towards a society where this kind of intolerance, this kind of bigotry isn't accepted and it isn't normalized in the mainstream, because we see headlines like quoting the Muslim problem. We see reports that constantly quote statistics, that 30% of people think that there should be less Muslims in the UK. There's such an over-exaggeration of the number of Muslims and the kind of the so-called threat that we bring to society. There's so many different things that are wrapped up in the problem of hate crime and the problem of anti-Muslim hate crime in particular. So I think that we need to kind of really explore those and then look at practical ways of fighting those, because as much as we might like to release statements and say and point and say, oh, this is really, really bad, this is abhorrent, there is a culture within British society that has allowed this to kind of far-right groups to spread and grow.
And how much of it would you say, so we'll talk about the Muslim community in a bit, but in terms of, Britain is a nation of migrants, you'd be hard pressed to go who's indigenous and who isn't now. It's that mixed, which is always, and most sensible people see that as a strength.
Yes.
Actually, Britain without diversity coming into the country wouldn't be what it is now. Yeah. And actually in Britain's history, Britain going out and colonising, and, that's got quite a lot of negative connotations, but if you try to see it more positively, spreading language, etc., it wouldn't still be the nation that it is without all that heritage of incoming and outgoing, and migration and relationships. So how much of it do you think has been recently fueled by sort of social media, so people have access to instant things, and then the other bit really is about, for me, around sort of terrorism and perception. So when people think about Islam and negatively about Islam and Muslims, tends to focus around terrorism, around the treatment of women, and then on some sort of antisocial behaviour and criminality. And don't get me wrong, I'm not pretending for one moment that there are not Muslims who are terrorists and who are criminal, etc., because they are. But that's, if you average that out for society, there's good and bad in everyone, isn't there? So my question to you, I suppose, or to both of us here, is how much of the way people are reacting to Muslims at the moment is fueled by the advent of, the easy access information and the misinformation, actually, because there's lots of incorrect stuff out there as well. Yeah,
I think there's always been misconceptions around Islam. There's always been prejudice and fear sometimes, going back decades and centuries about Islam as a religion, and Muslims as a people. So I think that it isn't an accident that that's continued. But I think what is really, really critical in this day and age is the spread of misinformation and social media, and how easily it's utilized for the sake of spreading lies about Muslims, and even even to the point where you can talk about far-right groups in the way that they use social media. So, for example, Britain First was retweeted by Donald Trump. Britain First is a relatively marginal, low populated, group of people. In fact, the two people, two kind of ringleaders were recently jailed for short periods of time. Yeah. But those, what kind of the reverberations that those kind of groups cause when you have people like Donald Trump in power is it's so kind of it's so damaging in society, because it platforms those views as A, normal, as B, acceptable, and C, as views that are worth spreading. I think that that's why it's incredibly dangerous at this point, and that's why we see this emboldening of people, to feel so brave to be able to send MPs, members of parliament, people who are supposed to represent communities, and specifically targeting them because they're Muslim, specifically targeting Muslim communities and sending them letters of hate, I think is a very brave act.
And I think it's brave and bold, but also cowardly. Yeah. Because they didn't sign it. Yes. They didn't put a return address on it.
That's true, yeah.
And I know I'm laughing a little bit about it, and it's not funny at all, but it is still cowardly, because that's a lot of the things with the anti-Muslim hate on Twitter or on Facebook. It's all anonymised, isn't it? Yes. And people can, it's not just arm's distance, it's miles distance, and people don't feel as responsible for their actions and the nastiness that they spread on there.
I think people, sometimes use it as an outpouring, where they can't, can't say things in society. They'll definitely use social media. But I think it is really, really interesting how, you're absolutely right. While people feel bold in their views, I think they feel bolder in thinking that their views are right, but they almost adopt this persecution narrative that we're right, but we're not able to speak about it. And I think that that's what fuels a lot of these people as well. This sense of injustice that Muslims are oppressors, or Muslims are terrorists, Muslims are ruining Britain, and they're involved in all of this crime. They're involved in XYZ, and that's why they should be. That's why and we the indigenous populations are being almost eroded. These kinds of.
So it's linked to sort of identity politics,
yes,
and people feeling a bit under threat, and that I can understand. On a basic level, on a surface level, I can understand that. So if I was in a cosy little village somewhere in the hills and the beautiful countryside, and suddenly I saw my way of life changing, that could be quite worrying, and I absolutely understand that. And I think we Muslims, when we're in our neighbourhoods and communities, we need to be aware of that. But equally, that fear, if there's enough opportunity, that fear could be turned into opportunity, couldn't it? Well, and it might become lifelong friendships, and you never know. So if there's fear on both sides, you never get to that point where you open yourself up to.
What's really interesting is actually how a lot of anti-Muslim sentiments and even like anti-immigration sentiments and xenophobic sentiments usually come from people who don't have that experience of immigrants, or don't have that experience of Muslims. Or people who are not from Britain in general. So it's almost like it comes from this like preemptive idea that there hasn't been an attack, there hasn't been a change in the way of life, or if there has been a change in the way of life in terms of for example employment or wages and that kind of stuff, it's usually not the fault of the people who have come in. It's usually economy, structures around government, those kinds of things. So I think like I said, it's hatred against Muslims is often an outpouring that's usually caused by lots of different factors. I think it's very unfortunate that Muslims do tend to be scapegoated quite frequently in mainstream media as well, and I think that again that emboldens people.
I know, because there's assessments done, isn't there, and you can look this up online, it's not hard, of mainstream media and like newspapers and the number of headlines that they've had over the year, and actually how much of them were about Muslims and perceived issues related to that, and the tone of them. So it's not fair reporting. Absolutely. It's one thing to say I don't know, we seem to have a problem with this group of Muslim, and this group of young men, and they happen to be Muslim, they happen to be engaging in this kind of behaviour. What's going on? Let's understand that.
Yeah.
And absolutely, where criminality is, we should be dealing with it.
Yeah.
And conversely, on the other side, where we go, oh, there's a group of young lads who don't seem to be doing as well at school or in the labour market, we need to understand why that is and do something about it. So it needs to be both ways. Yeah. But it's not presented like that, is it? It's usually these terrible so-and-sos are doing this horrible, terrible thing, that it's only them who do it when it isn't. So one of the things that's used to fuel anti-Muslim hate, I think, in my opinion, is, you know, how Islam treats women.
Yes.
And its perceptions of.
Yeah.
But then if you think about sexism in society generally,
yeah.
if you think about misogyny in society generally,
yeah.
I know Muslims are a big part of the world, but they alone couldn't sustain that level of
misogyny. No,
yeah.
no. I think the way in which gender is used, almost sometimes to divide communities as well, it is very damaging, and it is one of the ways in which Islamophobia manifests. So you see, you know, far right racists who suddenly, out of nowhere, you know, care about women and, you know, how clothed we are, how liberated we are. Our access to employment, our access to different services and things like that, I think only comes up when it's brown, you know, men that are you know, carrying
the
out
oppressors,
the oppressors.
well, the perceived oppressors, I should say. Yeah, because one of the things that really irritated me last year was Saudi Arabia, finally women were given the right to vote, and there was not vote, sorry, drive, and there was all this great big hoo-ha. In the same year, for the first time, women were allowed on the Sharia Council in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
That hardly got any column inches in mainstream media here, but the driving thing. Now, I think in terms of impact on society, which one is, they can become lawmakers, which is what that position is, or they can go out and pick up their own groceries, which if they want to do that, absolutely they should be allowed to do that. And they should, you know, my next question to people talking about this being a great thing, I was like, now they just need their own money and they need an access to their car, so their dad, husband or brother has to give them the car keys yet, unfortunately, so it'll be a while before you know. Now, the thing is, lots of women may not need to drive because they might not have a partner or whatever. Fine, all of that's fine, but isn't the bigger news story that these women are now lawmakers and they can be lawmakers, which, and again, it's very myopic, you know, there was very short-term vision, isn't it? The driving is important. I drive and I really value the ability to be able to do that. But then also I live in a country where I'm allowed to vote, where I'm allowed to, you know, hold positions in office, so that all that other stuff that we need laws and legislation where society isn't naturally doing it. So that is a privilege. So then driving just feels like a utilitarian thing. I do it to go from A to B, whereas if I didn't have it, it would be different. But that's something just very starkly, why are we focusing on one woman being able to drive and this 3 women on the Sharia Council could actually impact the lives of hundreds and thousands?
I completely agree.
And thinking, so there is something very, and then this exoticization of women's clothes. You know, frankly, I just like, leave me alone, don't talk about my hijab.
I'm very sick of talking about it. It's always, you know, what's beneath the veil, what's behind it, what's underneath it, all of these kinds of Orientalist sentiments, and they're really, really frustrating because I think there's such a focus around what women are and aren't allowed to do, and it's always exceptionalized. So it's always, okay, what, you know, if there's a problem in the Muslim community, it's amplified so many different, you know, so in so many different ways. So, you know, you find that, you know, there's always you know, disproportionate attention, media attention. There's a disproportionate amount of energy invested in trying to like free Muslim women from their shackles, which is obviously, you know, in and of itself would be quite a noble aim if it wasn't so divisive and if it wasn't for political purposes. So I think that there's a long way to go in terms of us recognizing, you know, those attempts and trying not to.
We've just got a caller joining us. Okay, maybe later they've left us again. It is a live show, so if you do want to participate, just call in either with a question or a comment. Thank you. Sorry to cut you off there.
That's okay. I've forgotten what I was saying, but
okay. Well, we'll pick up. We were talking about women and the amount of attention and dress and how it's used as a way to again fuel sort of Islamophobia, you know, and anti-Muslim, because perceptions are that all women are oppressed and repressed, etc. But if you look at things like domestic violence rates and figures, and I won't quote statistics because you always get them wrong on air.
Yeah.
But there are as proportionately as many white men beating their wives and partners or controlling behaviour, etc., as there are any other men from any other background.
Yeah.
So that idea that it's only Muslim men that behave a certain way towards their wives,
Yeah.
and it's only a tiny portion of Muslim men as well, and they do, but it doesn't bear out. So if you just scratch beneath the surface of some of these assumptions, it never quite follows through, does it?
Yeah, yeah. I think there is a like I said, there are racist undertones as well to the way in which Muslims are held to different standards. So if misogyny is a problem in the Muslim community, it's labelled as an example of extremism. There's always more weight added to it. And then, you know, following on from that, like the way, you know, the rights that women have in terms of, you know, all of the things that they can do, where they can go, who they can be with, all of these kinds of things are often quite fiercely debated. And I think that means that when we do face problems within, you know, within our own community, you know, whether that's domestic violence, whether that's, you know, not being allowed into mosques, whether that's, you know, all of these other things that are wrapped up within a Muslim woman's experience of the world, because it is challenging, no doubt, because you do kind of face that misogyny from outside and you face it from inside the community as well, which is disappointing, but that's just a lived reality. It's very difficult for you to bring that up and complain about it and try to change that, because there's always someone waiting to take advantage of that and say, yeah, so Muslim men are misogynistic then, and then it just becomes column inches, and it just becomes focused on.
It stifles debate, doesn't it? So we should be able to have open debate where we can say, actually, and I was having this conversation on sort of a closed Facebook thing yesterday about grooming and child sexual exploitation and what those issues are, and is it racial, and it is so racialised is the debate, but we need to be able to express it, and we need to understand it's sexual abuse, it's a type of abuse, it seems to lend itself to it, to some group of men tend to do it more than others, but in the whole spectrum of child sexual abuse, it's one tiny portion of it, but we blow things out of all proportion, don't we? And the thing with the women is, I liken it to it's like, you know, when women go do in the criminal justice system, so a woman will do, I don't know, she might steal shoes. This is a real example. Women may steal shoes for her child because they haven't got any, so it's out of desperation. She's more likely to get a custodial sentence than a man who does something much worse. And partly it's because society can't accept women doing something wrong. Because the expectation of women is, and this is mainstream society, this is all, you know, I'm not talking about Muslims here purely, and the expectations of women are such that they're held to a higher account. So we're going to have to break there now, but when we come back, we'll talk about what we can do about women's empowerment.